Welcome to Master Lab Systems. My name is Leah Bonasage, and today I will be looking at deploying Apache Kafka for real-time data streaming. Okay, so the agenda we have today is we'll be looking at exploring what is Kafka and the Kafka architecture overview, and also the deployment strategies through local or using Docker or just on the cloud based. Also installing Kafka locally, Dockerizing Kafka setup, explaining the role of Zookeeper as Kafka depends on Zookeeper. So also looking at starting up the Kafka cluster and testing Kafka cluster using CLI, which is the command line interface. Okay. So what is Kafka? What is Apache Kafka? Well, Apache Kafka is a distributed messaging system. It handles high throughput, low latency real-time data. It decouples data by producers and consumers. Yeah, so Kafka, in simple terms, Kafka is a messaging system. Well, how it works is that it normally uses producers and consumers. So producers will be what produces the messages that Kafka keeps or stores, and producers will then be what consumers will then be what consume those messages stored by Kafka. Okay. So looking at the Kafka architecture, so we have things such as topics, producers, consumers, and brokers. So topics, it's what Kafka uses to identify what message needs to go to it, or maybe what will be carrying the messages. While producers is what produces the messages to be carried by Kafka, and consumers, it's what consumes those messages kept by Kafka. Same goes for brokers. Brokers, of course, are what connect everything together to ensure the whole end-to-end flow. Okay, so Zookeeper, let's talk about Zookeeper. Zookeeper coordination as well, which we'll be looking at that in a minute. So, okay, let's look at the deployment options of Kafka. So, we can do a local deployment through test through dev if you have a development environment, or even through test if you have a test environment. Also, another easiest way to deploy Kafka would be to use a Docker Compose, which is the easy way of orchestrating Kafka deployment. And for scale, of course, you'd want to use Kubernetes, either a managed or unmanaged Kubernetes cluster. Okay, however, for this demo or for today's tutorial, I will definitely be using Docker Compose, as it is pretty much easily to deploy to local. Okay, so let's look at the Dockerized Kafka setup. What prerequisites it will be requiring to Dockerize our Kafka setup locally. Okay, so first of all, the Kafka image that we need to be using are the stable ones. It's from Bitnami, which is one of the help repositories, and or another one which will be Confluent. But in this case, we'll be using Confluent Kafka image. Okay, and also we'll be setting up our Docker Compose file, and also setting up our persistent volume and port setup using our environment variables in our Compose file. Okay, so starting a Kafka cluster. So Kafka cluster require a multi-broker setup. However, you don't really need it, even if you are running on the same node, for example. So also setting up broker unique IDs, which is also one of the things we'll be setting up in when we are unpacking our environment variables. Also, which will be connecting to the same Zookeeper, which is now what Kafka depends on or requires. Okay, so testing Kafka locally with CLI. Yes, we'll be looking at these commands on how we can create a queue, a Kafka topic, and ingest some messages through Kafka and display those messages using Kafka consumers. Okay. Yeah, best practices, of course. Maybe we'll be looking at this after the whole physical demo setup. Okay, so first, before looking at the best practices, let's look at how we can create these things to Kafka, how we can Dockerize our Kafka. Okay, so I'll open up my IDE, which is what I have. Okay, so as you can see, what do I need to start? Okay, First of all, I would recommend and strongly advise to install, which is the Docker Desktop, which is an interface to make it easier to manage your Docker images. So once you have that installed and running, you should be able to see it as the engine is running. As you can see, mine engine is running. So if it's like that, then it means the setup is successful. Fine. So now what we need now, okay, let me just narrow this. What we need is this file. So as I said, in your environment or in your project environment, so in your folder, this is basically the file you only need. Okay, so if I were to be in this here, so okay, so we create what? The docker compose.yaml file. So this is the file that we need, which is the docker compose.yaml. So this is what needs to come in. Of course, since we are using a docker compose, so we need to have this structure like this, unlike using a docker file. But of course, since this is a recommended way of deploying Kafka locally using Docker Compose, it's a recommended way. So just to give you a brief of this file, so the first thing we need to do is to define the version number of our Docker Compose that we will be using. So we define the version number of it, and also we specify the services. So the first service we need, it's a Zookeeper service, of course, as Kafka depends on it. So Zookeeper, of course, it's what ensures the whole end-to-end flow and what keeps the messages through Kafka. Kafka just displays those messages, but Zookeeper, it's what keeps everything. So we need a Zookeeper image, so which we specify there, as I said, from Confluent, which is a reliable source or an open source of getting those container images. So we specify the image name and the version number that we are looking for, and we are packing the environment variables. This is the client port that Zookeeper is accessible to, and this is the tick time for each request. So those are sports, meaning internal and external port for Zookeeper. Okay, now let's move looking at Kafka. So that's our Kafka image. We pull that image from Confluent as well, and we specify the image we are looking for in the version number. So that is the Kafka port, so which is internal and external, of course. The environment variables. So now we comes to specify the Zookeeper connection. So Kafka will be able to communicate with Zookeeper in terms of keeping those ingested messages. Okay, so looking at the broker, of course, since this is a single node machine, I'm not expecting any cluster, or I'm not dealing with a cluster of Kafka. So I only require a single node, which is single installation in this case. So hence we specify one there. So here's the Zookeeper connection. We specify the connection from Zookeeper and the port, which is the internal and external port for Zookeeper. So from there we specify the listeners, so it can be able to listen as those comes. Yeah, so again we specify that Kafka depends on Zookeeper. You can't start Kafka without starting Zookeeper. That's what it means. I mean, yes, you can run Kafka if your Zookeeper is not running. Okay, so from here, again, if you have a smarter IDE like mine, you can simply just run this button here. Basically, this means it's Docker Compose app. So again, same goes if you were to come from the terminal and do a Docker Compose, like if you do a Docker Compose app, again, it will automatically kick that file, click on that file, and executes. So again, since I've already done this, but another way that you would have to do it is through by clicking that there. So as you can see, automatically show you the suggested name, like it's gonna be Docker Compose app. So by clicking that, it will automatically, but it just that it's gonna take too long. If I would have to click it, I will have to wait until an hour, of course. But of course, since I've already done that, for the purpose of time, I'll just show you the file that you would need. Of course, the Docker Compose file that you would need, how it needs to be, what information is to come into it, and then from there I'll show you and then from there you run it. So automatically once you run it through a Docker Compose app command, you run it, it will automatically do the install. Of course, that will take forever to load, depending on internet speed. It will take too much time. So once it finishes, you should see from your images as well. So it will start up your Kafka class, your Kafka image, and also your Zookeeper images. As you can see on my side, I've already ran it and they've started up, and as you can see, they are both running. So even if now I were to go to my terminal, of course, and do a docker ps, which is to show or to list running images, you should be able to see those. Yes, as you can see, Kafka is up 15 minutes as well, Zookeeper is up 15 minutes as well. So of course, as I said, I've already done the whole installation process. I don't need to do it again. But if you have any issues in terms of running that, you can let me know via the comment section. I'll answer that, and I will be gladly willing to assist you on those issues you come across with. Okay, so from here, what we then need now, once we have started up our Kafka services and Zookeeper service, what we need now is to us to be able to interact with one image first, which is Kafka, so we can be able to start to consume and start to produce and send a real live message. Okay, so let's go back to our terminal again. Okay, so now what thing we need to be able to access that image there. So if we do again docker exec it, okay, let's do exec. Okay, so this is the command we need. So now basically this means we'll be able to execute commands inside our Kafka image, so we can be able to send a message and read that message. So of course, that's my docker exec command, docker exec the sheet. So we specify the image name or the container name. That's my container name, the bash, so it can give us the ability to in an interactive bash mode. Okay, so let's hit enter. Okay, as you can see, we are inside it. So one of the first things we need from here, so we can list out our consumers, or maybe list out our topics first. But first of all, we need to create a topic that will keep. So currently I have two topics, which is automatically like this one. Kafka creates it as soon as you send a test message, and then that's my test topic. So however, for now, I will create a new topic. Okay, so now let's begin to create a Kafka topic that we'll be using. So I have some list of some dumb comments to use instead of trying to cram those comments. So let's create a new topic called maybe Master Lab. We'll create that topic. Okay, and then let's copy the command. Let's go run it. Okay, so let's paste it. Let's hit enter. Let's wait Kafka to load that. Okay, as you can see, folks, created topic master lab. So from creating that topic, what we need to do now, so even if now we will try to list out the available topics, it should show us that topic. As you can see, master lab topic has been created successfully. So now we need to start a consumer now. So as well, instead of having this in here, so let's say lab. So let's start a Kafka producer now. Then we will start a Kafka consumer. I'll also explain that. Okay, so a producer would mean when it's what allows us to send messages or to produce messages. This is a consumer. Okay, so we are starting a consumer, a producer from that topic, which is the master lab topic that we originally created. Okay, let's select producer. Okay, as you can see now, it's opening up an interactive mode of us sending, meaning now it's listening to any incoming messages. Imagine you have a system that sends messages to a Kafka producer, and you then have another system that pulls those messages from your Kafka consumer. So, which is what we'll be looking at that as well. So now the producer is ready waiting for incoming messages. So what do we need to do now? We need to open another tab so we can be able to see that incoming message from the producer via the consumer. Okay, so if I come in here again, which is on this, okay, maybe let me open a new tab right here so you can be able to see. Okay, maybe let's do it clear here. Okay, and then do a docker ps again, because we need to be able in that image. So here, maybe let's first send this is a test message. It has sent it, but of course we can't see it right now yet until we start up the consumer. So again, the first command we need is to be inside the exec, so which is what docker execute first API. That's correct. Okay, so now again we are in an interactive mode in that Kafka image. So now we would start up what? The consumer. We need to start the consumer now. Okay, so let's start out the consumer. If we go to that command again to start out that consumer. Okay, let's put install app, which is the consumer name. Okay, so what this means basically, start the consumer again on localhost, meaning on that port for Kafka, on that topic, which is master lab, and the dash from the beginning. It means it's where Kafka needs to read from. It needs to read from the first message or from the beginning of the messages. So immediately the message that comes, it needs to get from the first message to come. So we don't have any time waiting or any downtime between the messages or any lag between those messages. So hence we are using the dash from Backending to ensure that we are getting the message as they come. Okay, so from that now let's start out now our consumer. Let's start out the consumer so it can show us the those messages as they come. Okay, let's start that one in. Sweet, as you can see, the consumer started already. It's listening the first image to come. There it shows. So imagine now it was so Kafka now was getting this message, and your dashboard or your log processor or any matrix collector will then collect these messages from this queue. So this is how Kafka works. So Kafka captured those messages, and Kafka is very reliable on keeping those messages. Hence it is called a failover messaging queuing, as it is able to keep very much image logs or data for such amount of time. Okay, so let's look at sending another image, another message. Okay, you'll forgive me for using one screen. Okay, so now if I would say I'm sending another message, okay, maybe let's do it this way. Let's put it this side. There we go. So now let's send another message. Okay, so now this is another test message from master lab systems. Okay, so we send that automatically. As soon as I hit enter, it should show on the consumer side. So let's hit enter. There we go. As you can see, folks, automatically we are able to receive the messages that was published by our Kafka producer. Hence, we can see it from the Kafka consumer side. Yes, I think that should be it, folks. Now we can be able to look at the best practices. Maybe do one last message as well. So, okay, this is a last Kafka test message. Okay, send that in. So again, one last thing that we want to show you before I end this. Okay, as you can see, that one was successfully sent as well, published. So let's exit the interactive mode. Let's exit as well the consumer, so we can see how many. As you can see, automatically if you exit the consumer, it tells you how much messages it has processed. So in this case, understand 3 messages. So Kafka consume was able to process 3 messages. Okay, so let's exit as well. Also exit this side. Okay folks, that should be it. Okay, going back to our presentation. So as I said, now we can look at the best practices. Of course, in a production environment, you definitely want to avoid using async properly to avoid the blocking. Of course, you want to use the async, so to ensure that you have a synchronous communication between the two. And you have the await and the async. So one, when the message gets published, and then the one can wait till that message has been successfully received to produce another one. Again, partition Kafka wisely to ensure that your failover is in place, and also Kafka can be redundant in terms of keeping those messages. Also, which is very important, secure your Kafka with SSL and authentication. As you can see on my side, I didn't even authenticate to it, so it's important when we are running it in a production mode, you'd rather want to have a security in place as well to ensure that it's not free from everyone, or it's not accessible from any malicious users. Okay, use background task and workers. So in a production environment, it becomes necessary to be able to use background task and consumers and workers, so that even if you are not there, your Kafka cluster can be able to keep on receiving messages and producing those messages whenever needed. Okay folks, that should be it. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comment section. I'll be answering those. And also please, if you like this video, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you folks, until next time, cheers.